Ugh. Another week, another 8 or so pages of official Legions Imperialis FAQ/Errata document. Games Workshop, you are spoiling us. How are we supposed to keep up with this ever-changing living rule set? Anyway, let's get on with it. Before we go, a disclaimer that I am currently suffering the worst cold I've had in living memory, so I'll be editing out a lot of coughs and sniffs. If you catch any of them, lucky you. This is, without a doubt, the best thing that this Heresy Thursday could possibly have offered. Yes, more models would be fun. Yes, another expansion book with teas would be nice. Yes, plastic armigers better be on their way soon. But come on. We've been begging for this, pleading for this, making our own back alley blue crystal versions of this, for what feels like and has actually been months and months and months. And now we have it. So is it all good? Is the game perfect now? Well, kinda. Let's do a nice deep dive into what's been changed, what's been solved, what is still outstanding. I'll put a title somewhere up here that tells you which document we're looking at as we're looking at it, so you can follow along at home. But the first thing I'd like to point out is we have new FAQs for the main rulebook, the Great Slaughter, Rise of the Dark Mechanicum, their associated cards, and that's it. The devastation of Talon is, by Games Workshop's own admittance, or omission, perfect already. So, let's start with the main rulebook, as it's the biggest and beefiest, and the one most of you are probably the most interested in. We'll start with the errata bit. For those of you who are unaware, FAQs are for the things which are unclear and just need an answer. Now we know there's a lot that's unclear and needs answers, so we'll get there soon. But the errata are bigger, because it's evidence the game is living. They've play-tested the game, listened to the players, and have made changes. They're the closest thing that specialist games get to balanced slates, and it's incredible that they're here. And the changes are pretty darn meaty. For example, the very first erratum is that infantry don't get to triple march anymore. This is such a huge change to the game, and a big change to infantry and their relation to vehicles. Previously, transports were nice, but when a transport can go march 14 inches, but an infantry base in its own can march 18, oh well. Transports aren't that big a deal. But now all transports move faster than their infantry counterparts, plus adding in the survivability of a giant tin can. This, I think, is the right move. It's more fluffy, and we all know that infantry needed a nerf. Cutting their turn 1 objective range by a third is a solid start. Will it be enough that we'll start seeing more tanks and less infantry spam? I don't know. I guess we'll have to just see how the meta evolves. However, not everything is good for transport. For example, anything with movement hyphen. If a detachment with movement hyphen is embarked on a transport, then they're stuck there until that vehicle is destroyed. And then they just have to hope they survive the explosion. Practically, this means Tarantulae can't be deployed in a vehicle. This is a little against the fluff, which specifically describes them rolling out of rhinos and setting themselves up, but probably better for the game. They did get a little boost later in the FAQ, and another slight nerf, but that's this one summarised. This advancing fire rule change is weird. It seems to fix the walkers with wrecker rules weirdness, but that's fixed much more neatly with a later rule. Maybe this is future-proofing something. I guess we'll find out. The resolving hits unit is big. Now, I've seen a few different interpretations of this. It might need an FAQ of an FAQ. My take is that each firing model now has to have line of sight to the target model. That means if only one model in your detachment can see only one model in the target detachment, you only get one model's worth of shooting. It's no longer the detachment has to be able to see, so you get a few different tries at killing that one target model you can actually see. But you decide the number of shots or dice based on the number of models that can see, and the allocated hits the number of models that can be seen. That didn't make it any clearer. But it's not the detachment of either. So it's more realistic, sure. More fiddly, yes. Harder to explain, yes. But I think that can be forgiven. It does make me want to invest in one of those laser range finders, though. Garrisoning structures is fun now. This means that you can garrison a structure that has a tank next to it, just not one that has an infantry base next to it. Because, and we'll get to this later, now only infantry can engage with garrisoned units. This is a very sexy preview of what Leviathans and Domitars can do now. But for now, let's just say it gives fewer ways to prevent garrisoning without just garrisoning it first yourself. A good change, as it seems silly that you couldn't garrison a building just because someone had parked their car outside, but it also means you could garrison a building the same turn someone else wreckers it, which seems ill-advised. But it's still possible, still ill-advised. And here's that later I was talking about for wrecker. Now, if you wrecker into base contact with a garrisoned building, you are no longer engaged or pinned with the units inside. This is huge, as it means Leviathans and Domitars and Knights cannot be bayoneted out of the window whilst they try and take down the building. And again, this will come up later, the detachments inside aren't allowed to enter into combat with you if it does get destroyed and they somehow survive. This clarifies the issues with wreckers entering into engagement with a building and then being pinned and useless by the infantry inside, and often losing their fights due to the increased building cap that the units inside have. This is such a great change that makes wrecker so much more useful and garrisoning so much less of a win button. If you've garrisoned a bunch of 6+ save auxilia into a building, then they're all automatically destroyed by a little wrecker or two. Well, Leviathans are now a lot better. Rowing weapons can't target flyers. I mean, obviously, come on now. The Quake rule change is the first one that turns something once completely useless into something that now actually works. Previously, a weapon with Quake may as well not have even had Quake, because it slows movement and reduces accuracy, but happens after the unit has already moved and fired, and then it wears off at the end of the turn. So it did literally nothing. Now, it actually does what it's supposed to do. It remains in play until the next move and fire. Potentially, this could last many turns if they do a lot of marching without firing, or first firing without moving. Interesting, and better. Sort of shock pulse. Doesn't look like much has changed here, just a formatting. Oh, hang on a second, it says detachment. It says detachment now. Good gravy, shock pulse is great now. One single shock pulse glances a single Kratos in a max-sized detachment, and the whole detachment of 6 Kratos can now hardly move or shoot. Half their movement and only 1 weapon each. What a goddamn buff. Be right back, just pulling off all my autocannon sabers and sticking neutrons on them. They might have to be bumped up a couple of spots on my best tanks ranking. Neutron sabers now are... yikes. Skyfire, I thought this was obvious. If you've been splitting Skyfire amongst several flyers, then you've been being that guy. Sorry to break it to you. There are support networks available. You can split your fire potentially maximum 3 ways. You can send point defense weapons in one direction, you can send Skyfire weapons towards a flyer in another direction, and you can send your other weapons to a third one. You can't split your Skyfire weapons between several flyers. No, what is wrong with you? Automated Sentry, and I may as well mention the drop pod version of this too while I'm here, 2 rules ahead, and they have tactical strength 0 now, and this cannot be modified by any way. This makes sense. It means you can no longer spam technically infantry tarantulas onto an objective. Now you actually need something with some degree of consciousness. Not getting into the ethics of whether robots have consciousness and what the machine spirit is. Do remember though, OC0 units can still capture objectives. They just can't contest them. Again, I thought this was obvious, but they've clarified this later on as well. A tarantula on its own has an objective, but if anything else is in range, no, not yours anymore. Deep Strike. This rule just clarifies how risky it is now. If you scatter badly, then the whole detachment dies. RIP detachment. However, it does clarify that Overwatch happens after a deep striking unit has fully deep striked. It also clarifies that the past tense of deep strike is deep striked and not deep struck, which is certainly a thing. But it does mean that a drop pod, and notably a Deathstorm pod, cannot be shot out of the sky. They get to do their whole shebang, unload models, fire their super weapons, orbitally bombard. They can't be overwatched until afterwards, which in reality means they just won't be overwatched. Which is amazing, as it means Deathstorms might actually be worth taking now. Whether they actually will is to be seen, but it's at least a possibility now. Flyers cannot overwatch, even against other flyers. This is huge, especially with all their Skyfire weapons, which have the slightly better overwatch anyway. This makes the 1 wound flyers much more defensive but less offensive flexibly. Your Xyphons won't be able to be overwatched by other Xyphons, but also won't be able to overwatch other Xyphons. It's a fully horizontal move in my opinion, but I expect it lends itself to slightly more interesting games. Forward deployment has been clarified to happen after infiltrators. This is great, as it means infiltrators can't wait for all your deployment to happen and then plonk down out of range of forward deployers. Now you can sneak up with a forward deployment and jump out if the opponent hasn't measured the movement range of all your forward deployers and predicted where you'll put them. It might mean Alpha Legion players will actually choose forward deployment now, rather than just infiltrating everything. But we'll get to more of that later. Later is now, in fact, because infiltrators cannot charge first turn. This is a big hit to all those Alpha Legions infiltrating Leviathans 4 inches away from their enemy's deployment zone and charging turn 1. And it also significantly weakens infiltrating Pioneer Velatari, but to be honest, weakening Alpha Legion and Pioneer formations sounds pretty sensible to me. Master Tactician sucks now. Arguably its only point was to give a sneaky turn early charge or first fire to units coming in from deep strike or in non-assault transports. Now they can't do that, meaning you can now only swap to one you could have chosen to begin with. Good for on-the-fly mind-changing, I guess, but it removes it as something to actually plan for in advance. A shame, but I don't think anyone's Master Tactician shenanigans were turning the tide of many battles, so oh well. Still, on that note, it's weird they bothered to change it. Anyway, transport. You now can't embark allied models into your main model's transports. I don't know who was filling Thunderhawks with Thanatars, but you can't now, so stop it. And that's the end of the rules bit of the errata for the first book. There's one erratum for a mission and a few more for marine special rules. First, the change to breakthrough. You can't give supplies to units that are not already on the table. No, bad power gamers. That should have been obvious. Just an extra couple of words to stop all of the that guys out there who are abusing an obviously wrong interpretation of a wording on one mission. Silly people. Ultramarines have had their rule technically nerfed, but really just clarified. They've made it clear you can't slow roll with a detachment until you get a hit to get the bonus with the rest of the rolls from that same detachment. That was obviously intended, so I don't think it changes that much. Wordbearer's special rule is the first literal erratum, as in fixing an error. The original said broken detachments could march rather than charge. That's fixed. However, we'll be returning to the Wordbearers as an FAQ later on, has buffed them slightly. Alpha Legion's Mutable Tactics has clarified that they need to choose which detachments get which special rule right at the start of the game. Not after everyone else has deployed and then deciding last minute which detachments they're going to infiltrate. This, plus the couple of nerfs to infiltrate and buff to forward deploy, has made the Alpha Legion special rule a little bit worse, but a little bit more interesting, which is good, as before it was really boring and way too good. I'm not sure if the nerfs have stopped them still being the absolute best Legion in the game, but they're certainly a little bit not as good as they were, which is a move in the right direction. On the downside, this rule being written here has also caused a couple of very loud, very wrong voices to claim that Alpha Legion only get this rule if they don't take any other Astartes Legions formations, and no, stop it. That's not how words work, and even if it were, then the second part of the rule would then do nothing. If a formation is fully Alpha Legion, it gets 3 mutable tactics. If it's part of an allied Alpha Legion detachment, it gets 1 mutable tactics. If you're reading it any other way, I don't know, seek help. And that's the new errata from book 1. Let's rattle through the FAQ before getting into the meat of the other books. Are engaged and pinned models issued orders as normal? Yes, of course they are. That's how you can give them charge orders to consolidate into more fighting, and advance orders to shoot after the fight if they win. That's the whole point. Who's not been reading the rules to need to ask this? Speaking of, the second one. If just one model is able to consolidate more than 1 inch with a charge order, the whole detachment now gets the charge bonus. Yes, get in. Literally. Does a detachment that is on the losing side of a combat and fails morale receive a fallback token? No. Hallelujah. 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 Thank goodness that's over. If you've followed my previous rules videos, you know that I was fully on the side that this was intended to be the case, but that rules as written was wonky and made it look like you did in fact take a fallback token. So I'm so glad this is here. This is the highlight of the whole thing for me. A-star G-dubs. Movement-units can't move into coherency. I mean, obviously, they can't move, but it is nice that we have confirmation. It means you can take out that middle tarantula in a unit of 8 and take 3 others down with it for free. If a structure is in range of an objective, do garrisoned units contest it? Yes. Again, I think this is obvious, and I don't think anyone wasn't playing this, but it's nice to have confirmation. Can models which survive a collapsed structure be placed into engagement with models which were in base contact with it? No. More of a buff to Leviathans and other wrecking models. Good shout. Firestorm is good now. It fires at building, every model inside is hit. This makes the Malcador Infernus much nicer, especially if you take them as the battle tank in a Pioneer formation and forward deploy them to get to the midfield earlier. This could be really, really fun. A couple of answers in a row that really want you to be clear that automated sentries do not get order tokens, ever. Stop being silly. Good. The next one is interesting, and I thought it was the opposite. Dedicated transports don't need to be full of models when deployed. They can be deployed empty if you like. Weird. And I have no idea why you'd want to, especially with the upcoming nerf to dedicated transports. But still interesting. There may be shenanigans there of which I'm currently unaware. Legate commanders are permitted based on the points limit of the army, not the actual points spent on solar auxiliary detachments in that army. That's great. Now we get to use more legates. Big one now. Do models that do not count for calculating breakpoint count against reaching the breakpoint? Yes. Wow, dedicated transports have had a nerf. Rhino spam lists now are at a significant disadvantage when it comes to remaining unbroken. If you fill your formation with dedicated transports, then each of those suicide rhinos is just free breakpoints for your enemy. Considering the strength of Rhino spam lists, this is a good ruling, I think. However, as I implied before, this does make Wordbearer Rhino spam lists a fair bit better, as although they still receive the morale penalty, they can still give all the orders they want to, regardless of how broken they are. At the end of the game, when everyone else can only advance, and you can first fire to your heart's content, that might make Wordbearers worth taking. And, considering before they had one of the worst rules, that's a pretty good thing. So a lost combat, although it doesn't get both consequences of failing a morale check, does get both consequences of being broken, which also makes being broken a bigger deal, thus making Rhino spam even riskier. Interesting stuff. Terrain-based penalties to hit are cumulative, which is fun if you're firing through bad terrain into a detachment in dangerous terrain. Making terrain and accuracy more relevant is always a good thing in my book. Transports finish their move before exploding and spitting their sardines out everywhere. Good. It seemed obvious and certainly the neatest, cleanest solution, but I'm very glad it's been clarified. Can commanders get into dedicated transports with their crew? Yes. Seemed obvious, but good for the clarification. A flyer cannot enter the battlefield in hover mode. They have to wait until the end of the turn when they choose not to leave the battlefield. That's as written, sure. It does make getting non-jump pack models out of a flyer harder to do without the flyer exploding, but never mind, we really don't need flyers to be made any stronger. Auras can't be transmitted out of a vehicle, but can be transmitted out of a structure. Makes sense. Detachments in a vehicle are officially in reserve, whilst those in a structure are officially on the table. That's all fine and good. Engine Killer and Rend join forces to absolutely wreck heavy vehicles. This is fun. If you have a model with multiple weapons that have Rend and Engine Killer, you get 2 Rend dice, and if you win, you do both the Engine Killer wounds added together. I have no idea how often this is going to come up, but I guess all of those double Chain Fist Reavers out there need something to do. Independent units that have to withdraw don't force the rest of their detachment to withdraw too. That's nice. Big one here. Infiltrating units can infiltrate directly into a building outside of your deployment zone. So although you can't charge first turn or deploy and garrison tarantulas out of a rhino, you can deploy directly into a structure if you like. If you think you might be charged, do this with your Velatari. You still have Rend, and you get the CAF bonus because you're in the structure. But be careful you don't get that structure wrecked with the new better wrecker rules, because then they're all dead. So don't do this with your tarantulas. This is fun and shenanigany. Light weapons can count as hits, even if they're discarded and can't wound. This specifically refers to Ultramarines in this FAQ, but that would also apply to other marking units like Cyclops Walkers in the Dark Mechanicum. If you've got lots of Overlord and Archers aiming at one detachment, going for a many-shot light option on your Cyclops might be worthwhile now, as it doesn't matter if those hits cannot wound, they still count as hits for marking. Shenanigans. Are drop pod doors significant? Yes, apparently so. Rip to everyone who was printing them with their door shut, and double rip to those who actually bought them and then glued them shut. If you're that worried about it, just stick them on a base. You will need quite a big base, like the Dreadnought drop pods do take up an 80mm base, but you know, it's worth it to save you prying open those glued doors. Can models disembark directly into a building? No. I think that's how we were all playing it. It has to be at the end of the detachment's activation, not at the end of the transport that the detachment was in's activation. But nice for the clarification. And wow, that was a big chunk. All good though. Let's have a slice at intermission. Go get a cup of tea, a slice of cake, do a wee or a poo, and then come back and we'll carry on with the other books. And then a quick rundown on the biggest winners and biggest losers from all this. Other than me, of course, who has at this point written 3,326 words about an update to the rules of a game of toy soldiers, which means I am clearly the biggest winner. Welcome to part 2 of What the Hell Am I Doing With My Life, the video essay, also known as The Great Slaughter FAQ document. Errata 1. Deathstorm drop pods get orbital assault. I mean, obviously, but glad they fixed it. Another one that's clearly just fixing an error. Well done, team. Erratum 2. Remote controlled detonation. Cyclops can do something now. They can throw their explosion just a little bit now, so the central hole can be over a building or the model they're attacking. This isn't so much a buff as just meaning they actually work as intended now, and might actually be worth taking in a Pioneer or two. The little cuties. 1. Can dedicated transport drop pod detachments take palisades? No. Good, that's what we thought. And that's the end of part 2. Part 3, The Rise of the Dog Mechanicum. Again, the devastation of Talon is apparently perfect. The book, that is, not the devastation. Unless you're into that. Anyway. Erratum 1. Fixing that designer's note that got all your knickers in a twist. Look, Objective Control 0 units cannot contest objectives. That's it. Any model can control an objective that is uncontested. Nothing in a silly little designer's note changes that fundamental fact of the game. But just to make you happy, they changed it anyway. Are you happy now? Go capture uncontested objectives with your Titans and Tarantulas. Go on, I hope you're pleased with yourself. Thalax lose their plasma fusil, but gain a multi-melter. This is really funny because there were several Reddit threads zooming into the models and saying, doesn't this plasma fusil look more like a multi-melter? And all the comments said, yeah, but the rule say it's a fusil. What are you going to do? Change the datasheet, apparently. Thank you, Games Workshop, who presumably just didn't check which weapon was actually modelled onto the tiny little cyborgs. Myrmidons, both versions, each gain a new gun, which is great. The close combat version, Secutors, get the plasma fusils that the Thalax dropped, which is very funny, and makes them much better. And the Destructors get both of the weapons on their data card, not a choice of the Volkites or Beamers, which is good because no one was ever going to choose the Volkites. But now it just makes them a little bit more flexible and shooty. Really, these guys have quickly become the best infantry in the book, especially because the next one, only them and Tech Thralls can go in Triaros now. This is bad for the Mechanicum, and not quite as bad, but still annoying for the Dark Mech. Triaros aren't large transports anymore, which means they can't carry 2 Thanatars each anymore, which makes sense given their size, but also means they can't carry 2 Domitars, or Almatax, or any of the robots at all. They also can't carry any Thalax or Ursarax, because their jump packs make them bulky. This means that the Vanilla Mech's one selling point, fast-moving robots in transports, now isn't a thing. Now only Tech Thralls and Myrmidons are valid options for Triaros. And that is a big nerve to an army that's already really struggling competitively. It wouldn't surprise me if this was either changed back or at least changed to an assault transport so Thalax and Ursarax can use them again and Secutors can actually do something on the other end. But this is a huge blow to Mechanicum. And I don't really know why. Unless they just really didn't want Thanatars in there, but just give them a special rule that says Thanatars can never be embarked upon transports or something. I don't know. This is the only erratum that I think is wrong. And annoyingly, it's the one we're ending on. Sad times. But still, let's look at the overall good and the overall bad. Overall losers are the Mechanicum, who, in spite of the Myrmidons and Thalax getting decently better, have lost a lot of their manoeuvrability and uniqueness in terms of their approach and tactics, and they really didn't deserve to lose it. Alpha Legion and Infiltrate in general got a little nerf, making it happen before forward deployment, and the choice of which detachments to infiltrate before the battle even starts is harsh, but fair. However, there's the slight tactical boost it got by allowing you to infiltrate directly into a garrison in the midfield, so a mixed bag. But overall, a slight and a deserved nerf to Alpha Legion and Pioneer formations. Infantry in general got a bit of a nerf. Firstly, they're far less movable due to the triple march being taken away. They're no more reliant on their transport for the big moves, but dedicated transports are a bigger risk for everyone except the word bearers. So it's now a decision that has to be weighed up rather than just going lol suicide rhinos. Infantry also have less flexibility when it comes to defending against wreckers, which makes garrisoning a little bit riskier, particularly against Leviathans, Knights and Domitar heavy lists. But again, infantry is king in this game, probably even still with these nerfs, so I think this is only a good thing. Conversely, winning are lots of the rules that actually work properly now. Not even work properly, work at all now. Quake, Electron Pulse, Firestorm, Remote Detonation, all of those fun little special weapon rules now actually do the thing they're supposed to do, which should lend itself to far more and much needed variety in the game. Pioneer formations may have taken a hit, but any that survived the cut are almost certainly guaranteed to be taken a Malcador Infernus now. And word bearers' flexibility with their orders, even when broken, might mean we actually see word bearers being taken because they fit the tactics of the player using them, not just because the player has the hots for Lorgar, although those players will unfortunately continue to exist and have the hots for Lorgar. We also finally have answers to lots of those nitty-gritty questions that have been bugging us for so long. All of them? I don't think so. Not quite. But I'll talk to the community FAQ team to see what still needs clarifying and do another video about those persisting FAQs. But now is not the time for that. Now is the time for celebration. Our game is alive and it's getting better. Who knows? Maybe one day every book will be just like the devastation of Talon. Practically perfect in every conceivable way. I'd like to end with my usual thanks to my Patreons and a little plug for it. I haven't done a plug for my Patreon in a while, but most of my Patrons are from America and the dollar has taken a hit this month, which has cut my monthly by at least a third in terms of take home in pounds. This isn't my job, so I don't rely on the Patreon or YouTube ads to put food on the table or pay rent or anything, but I do use it to support the channel. It means I can splash out on better editing software, better sound tech, spend money on a box of 120 models because I need one bit inside it for a kit bashing video. This channel is a hobby and it's one I'm enjoying, but it's also an expensive one. If you think how expensive the hobby in general is, times that by a chunk for making a channel out of it. So if you feel like supporting the channel in that way, please do. And in return, you get one-to-one conversations with me, you lucky person, and you can request videos and kit bashing ideas directly, as well as hobby advice and feat picks. Plus you get advanced access to videos, scripts, kit bashes and feat picks. If you're not of a Patreon persuasion, please like and subscribe and comment to help the algorithm. It really does help. And on that note of helping, peace and love. I hope you're all having a very happy Eastertide. And most of all, please, please keep on lit bashing. I'm going to bed.